Good morning, gang. Bob Devance for the Dressler BFG for August the 16th of 2020. Glad to have everybody here who is here. We'll be watching this along the way. Today we'll be finishing up our study in the book of Proverbs. We'll be dealing in Proverbs chapter 31 primarily. The subject as printed in the book is finding honor, dealing with honor and the things that go with that. And I think we'll get some things out of this maybe that we can use. However, a couple of quick things, and by way of going into this, Proverbs chapters 30 and 31 have a common question for us, namely, who was the writer? We really don't know. We find in chapter 30 that these are recorded by Agur, A-G-U-R, and chapter 31 says this is the advice given by King Lemuel, given by his mother to him, rather, and we don't really know who either one of those people were for sure. Now, there's a lot of thoughts. And of course, there always will be a lot of thoughts about anything like that when something is somewhat undetermined. I mean, that's just kind of the way life runs, isn't it? But nonetheless, some think that King Lemuel was actually king in an area called Manasseh, which was in northern Arabia. And they think that maybe that's the case. Now, how would get from there to the book of Proverbs, I'm not real sure. That would be an interesting conjecture in and of itself. Others feel like that really this was just a pen name for Solomon, that he was in fact writing about himself. And I kind of go with that. I kind of feel like that's probably not a bad assumption anyway. Actually, there are three different thoughts or three different teachings that Lemuel's mother give to him. And I think they're probably all good advice, not only for a potential monarch, but for anyone who has any kind of authority or overseeing of any other people. One, do not use your power to indulge in debauchery. Keep your life clean, basically. Stay sober. Don't be overly impacted by strong drink. And third, use your authority to defend the weak, to defend the defenseless. Now, in her first 9 verses of this chapter, she doesn't talk a lot about fearing the Lord, but we see that come out a little bit later on in the chapter. So I would add probably she had in the back of her mind also that following God was one of the main things that would be important along the way for her son. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, or whether in fact King Lemuel really was someone else. Does it really matter? Probably not. That's good advice nonetheless. Then the remaining verses in chapter 31 deal with what we call the virtuous woman. And we get that word virtuous from the King James, the New King James, which uses that particular term. Basically, she seems to be providing him with a checklist, for lack of a better term, on finding the perfect wife. So maybe that's what was really intended. We certainly don't really know, but it certainly could be that. Now, thinking again about the writing of the time, we were in a very patriarchal society, and to me it just seemed natural that she would be gearing this toward the male, tutoring him in what to look for a wife. I think that really makes sense. So that's really the position from which I'm going to approach this. Now, granted, and yes, there are lots of good pointers here for all of the women that are out there watching this today, and that you might pass on to your daughters and granddaughters and maybe great-granddaughters along the way. Absolutely. But I'm not going to preach to you ladies, basically, is what I'm saying, but rather just talk about what the advice is that Lemuel's mother is providing him in looking for a wife. Now, you might also remember we used the word chiasmus or chiasmatic writing in several of the other chapters prior to this point. And that style of writing means that the writer puts the central thought or the main thought more or less in the middle of his writing or in the middle of his poem. And then everything fore and aft of that are supporting points for that main point. And we see that here in this section as well, verses 10 through 30. We pretty much see that played out. In addition to that, this was also an acrostic. If we looked at the Hebrew alphabet, we would see that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are employed in this poem. as an acrostic. So, of course, the acrostic doesn't play well for us because of our English translations. So we don't see that part play out. But we do see the chiasmus play out to a large degree. If you have the notes, and I really hope that you do, because this will be a great help for you. At the bottom of the first page, there's a listing of how this chiasmus actually works. If you look at this, we start out in verse 10, a high value for good life for the lady, talking about this potential wife, of course. And then the husband is benefited by the wife. Wife works hard, wife gives to the poor, has no fear of the snow. The children are clothed in scarlet, as coverings for their beds. The wife wears linen or very fine clothes. And then the middle thought, public respect for the husband. The wife would be one who would add to the respect that the husband would receive in the town square or at the city gates, is the idea behind that. And that seems to be the central thought, the theme to which all this is working up to. And then going down from there, we see companion thoughts at the same levels, basically. She sells garments and sashes, and some translations say belts. She's clothed with dignity, no fear of the future, speaks in wisdom, and she works hard. Boy, is that an understatement. And her husband and her children praise her. And we see all those things happen. And then at the last, companion back to verse 10, the high value of a good wife. And so that's kind of what we're going to do with this today. This will be a little bit unconventional, as we usually start at the top and work our way down. But in this case, we're going to start in the middle and work our way back and forth. Again, if you have the notes, that will help a lot because they're printed in that order. But let me ask a question first before we go on. As a mother, ladies, what advice would you give to your son or sons about finding a godly, supportive wife? What would you say to him or to them if you have more than one son? Think about that a little bit. Maybe tuck that question away in the back of your mind as we go through this, and see if you find some answers to that question that you might keep, and again in the back of your mind, if you have opportunity to counsel with one of your sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, or maybe just some young men that are in your presence throughout your neighborhood or throughout your presence. Some things to think about. Okay, as we said, we're starting here in the middle in verse 23. Proverbs 21:23. Excuse me. Her husband is known in the gates. When he sits among the elders of the land. Okay? He's well known. He's recognized. The mother there says to look for a woman who will compliment you and make you look good. That's kind of Bob's paraphrase to that, I guess. What will make you look good when you sit among the elders of the land? How does that work out for you? Okay? What kind of a woman can do this for you? And then the verses before and after now are going to supplement that and try to define what that really is. So here we go again, then going on from there. Proverbs 31:22, the previous verse, she makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Going the other way, the verse after, verse 24 says, she makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes or belts for the merchants. So how does this describe this woman that's going to make the husband look good? Well, first of all, she makes the linen garments and sells them, which says, well, first of all, linen was a prized material for making very nice garments, high quality garments. She makes those, and they're good enough that she can sell those that we find in the other verse. Also, her clothing is fine linen and purple. This clothing that she has for herself is made out of fine materials. Purple was a dye that was hard to come by. It came from shellfish, generally out of the little country of Phoenicia. So it's relatively expensive. As a matter of fact, side note on this, as we talk about this woman, we'll find that this woman is a woman of some means, because she has servants and does a lot of other things along the way that a peasant would not be able to do or would not have access to. So we'll see those things as we go along. So she's well dressed. She has good clothing. Her coats, her garments are all good. Purple was a symbol of importance or royalty. Her garments were so good that she could sell them, and apparently the merchants loved to receive her merchandise because it was high quality from a couple of things we see a little bit further down. It would seem like that the old adage that I use, that if you dress well, you present yourself well, seems to be the case here. That she is well dressed, well groomed, well cared for, and presents herself very, very well. A form with which the husband would be proud of her, no matter where they happen to be. Okay, taking a couple more verses, one before and one after from there, Psalm 31:21. She's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. And then 25, going the other way, strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in the time to come. So this rather continues the train of thought dealing with the clothing and the outward appearance that's there. Of course, this adds the strength and honor, the inward appearance as well, by the way. But nonetheless, she and her household are well provided for, summer or winter, sunshine or snow and rain. Doesn't matter. They're taken care of, and it's done well, and it's done in a way that would stand out and would say, this woman is taking good care of her family. Look at what they're wearing. Strength and honor are heaped upon her to recognize the efforts that she's putting out on this. Her efforts are not going unnoticed, either in her own family or in the families around her, or perhaps even from later verses, what the men of the city would think of her when her husband sits in the gates. Later on in our study today, we're going to take a quick look at Psalm 112, and we find this same kind of ideology is applied to a man, that his strength and honor is exalted in what he does. Okay, going on from there, two more verses, again going fore and aft. Verse 20, she extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. And 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. So this is a woman of benevolence. Now she's busy. She's industrious. We can see this with all these things that she's doing. But she also has time and compassion for those who has less than she has and can minister to those people. And I would inject there that not only did she portray that herself, but she would teach her children and those in her household those same principles. She's also wise in managing the family's assets, taking care of all the things that are around them. Like verse 25, wisdom, figuratively speaking, adorns her. She wears her wisdom. You can see it in the way she conducts herself. Next two verses, 31, 18, and 19, and I pull these two together. She perceives that her merchandise is good. As we said before, she makes good stuff. And her lamp does not go out by night. I would translate that to say she burns the midnight oil. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She can deal with the menial task of running the household as well, sometimes late at night, perhaps. This distaff and the spindle refers to making thread, taking the flax or the wool and using it, twisting it into thread that can be woven into material or cloth. And then 27, she watches over the ways of her household. She does not eat the bread of idleness, which goes back to her lamp not going out by night. This woman is busy. She is not an idle person. We've seen it in previous verses of Proverbs where the writer cautioned against sluggardness, that we not be like a sluggard and dull. And this woman certainly is not. She's very busy, watching over everything, yet has time for the good things and taking care of those who are less fortunate than she. She's industrious in every way. Going on, 31, 15 through 17. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. This woman's something else, isn't she? My goodness. When she arises and watches after her household, we would say in today's terms, make sure that everyone gets breakfast and is fed well for the day's activities. And it also implies that she had the schedule for all of her people so that everybody knew what they were supposed to do during the day so that they also were as productive as she was. She seems to be very resourceful in buying this field that she looks at. Now, is this bought with her own resources, or is this bought with resources that belong to her husband? We're not told, but it could be either way, certainly. But either way, she buys this field and she does good with it. She plants a vineyard on it from which she would be able to make additional revenue come in, as well as provide food and drink for her family. So she does really well with that. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. Again, we'll see that kind of ideology when we talk about the man here in just a little bit that we're going to add to this. This woman is amazing, isn't it? She provides, she organizes, she buys and sells, she remains strong spiritually, mentally, and physically. She's got it all together. Okay, a couple more verses. 11 and 12. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. And then 28 and 29, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. And he says, many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Do you get the idea that she is honored and blessed and cherished in her own family from her husband and all of the children? How they compliment her and recognize all these things that she's doing. And I believe for her goodness as well, not just for her physical provision, but for the things that she's doing spiritually and mentally for her family and encouraging them, builds them up. Also, this thing about trust. How important is trust in a marriage relationship? It affects every family member, doesn't it? If trust is present, then the family members can rest in each other's comfort, knowing they're okay with each other. Everything is okay between them. There are no skeletons in the closet, if you please. But if trust is absent, there's constant turmoil and strife and backbiting, looking over one's shoulder to see what's coming up from behind, what's going to hit you when you don't expect it. And apparently none of that is present in this lady's household. She is very trustworthy. Trust leads to the praise and the confidence that is given to her in verse 28. She deserves it, in other words. And then the crowning jewel of this passage, to me anyway, Psalms 31:10. Who can find a virtuous wife? Her worth is far above rubies. Virtuous is an interesting term. The Hebrew word for virtuous, also translated in some translations as noble character, implies strength and ability. It's repeated a couple of times here, we'll see. Ruth, by the way, was called a virtuous woman as well, Ruth 3:11. She's given that same attribute. When this is used of men, it's often translated in the phrase, a mighty man of valor. It is not impossible to find a woman like the one described here. But a woman is valuable like this because she is a rare, precious jewel. She's in high demand and short supply. And you know, we might tell our sons that same thing when they set their sights high for the bride that they're looking for, that they may not find one with every little piece of this put together. That the lady that they marry may not, in fact, develop some of these things. But at least it gives them something to think about, doesn't it? Let's see, verses 30 and 31. Give her the fruit of her hands. Let her own works praise her in the gates. So how much is the good wife worth? There's no price that you can assign, of course not. Further, those around this wife recognize her virtue and they praise her, as we've said previously. She's a living, walking testimony to virtue and God's blessing. And now verse 30, which I was trying to get to. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Isn't it interesting We started out at Proverbs 1, verse 7, talking about one who fears the Lord. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And here we ended up with this woman about whom we say she is a woman who fears the Lord. Where does she get all of these character traits, this virtuousness that she's displaying? Because she fears the Lord. God is guiding her. God is giving her wisdom beyond her own wisdom, such that she can do what she's doing as she leads her family. Wow. Now, back to what we said in the beginning, moms, how do you advise your sons on selecting a wife? Well, I think it's always better to set the sights high and aim for the best, and then go that route. Following on to that, can you summarize in just a few words what mom views as a virtuous wife in this passage? The mother who's writing it, what does she view as a virtuous wife? One who supports her man, one who supports and loves her family, but one who fears the Lord more than anything else and follows him and his guidance. Now, flip the coin just for a minute. Stay with me here. What words of wisdom might you give this same mom that she would give to a daughter about finding a virtuous husband? Where do we go with that one? Well, I'm going to pick on Psalm 112 because I think it gives some good answers in a very concise format. So reading just some selected verses from Psalm 112. Again, if you have the notes in front of you, you'll see this printed there for you. Praise the Lord. That's always a good place to start, isn't it? Blessed is the man who fears the Lord. Back to Proverbs 1:7 again. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commandments. Unto the upright there arises light in the darkness. He is gracious, full of compassion, and righteous. A good man deals graciously and lends. He will guide his affairs with discretion. He will not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. He has dispersed abroad, that he has given things to other people. He is given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. And this last part of that verse, his horn will be exalted with honor. You remember we talked earlier about the woman being given honor, and that's the idea here. The word horn speaks of power and dignity for the man, and it's used in several other places in Scripture. Because of this man's generosity, the Lord allowed him to lift up the eyes, allowed him rather to be lifted up in the eyes of his peers, those around him. As you see this man's faith in the Lord and the love for those in need, you cannot help but think of the promise in Matthew 6:33. Seeking for the Lord and having all these things added to you is the essence of that verse. See God, and all the things we need will be given to us. Excuse me. Note there are many of the same characteristics apparent for both the woman and for the man. That's those things that we just read. The chief indicator, though, chief common factor between these two is the fear of the Lord. A potential bride who fears the Lord is to be praised. A potential groom who fears the Lord is likewise to be praised and honored. A young person needs to look long and hard at the character of the person that he or she considers marrying. Sexy looks, a winning personality, popularity, all are not bad in themselves, but they are not the basis for a lifelong commitment. And of course, commitment is one of those chief words that we need to be considering when we talk about marriage, because it is a lifelong commitment. Few things cause as much pain and regret as marrying a person of bad morals or weak character. That's from the Shepherd's Notes, their idea. How do we summarize chapter 31? Well, again, I'm going to defer to Shepherd's Notes because I thought they had a very succinct paragraph. The poem in praise of the good woman concludes in the Proverbs with the implied exhortation that the young man will not have a successful and joyful life without a good and godly woman at his side. And I'd have to say amen to that. Absolutely. She is hardworking, savvy with money, a good manager, compassionate, and godly. She also has class. She deserves all the praise that she receives. With such a wife, it's no wonder that the men of the city respect her husband. I'd add, think what she's added to that and to his well-being. And by extension, then, the same is true of the young woman's search for the man in her life. If you have young people in your life who are thinking about marriage or perhaps looking for a mate, feel free to pass this video on to them. Perhaps it would help them as they look at their future. And if so, it would be well served for me to have done that. Have a wonderful day. Bless you. Don't forget to attend church today, either in person or via the internet. Be part of that and be praying for all the things that we're still doing. Just because we're not meeting full time in our church building doesn't mean that the church has stopped functioning. Anything but. We're still alive and active. God bless you. Have a great week.